Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the AAA's webinar on embracing the change about MOS changes and emergency management at airports. My name is Matthew Harper from Resilient Results, and I've just finished a project with the Airports Association to rewrite APNs 1 and 2. Couple of little technical hitches I'm having today. I've got a microphone that keeps falling down, but if you can bear with me, I have a technician that I'm looking at in one window who is telling me that everything should be fine, and he'll wave at me frantically if it's not. As we go through this, if you have any questions, as you think about them, there's a box there with a little speech bubble on it. Just hit the box and type your question, and at the end, Dean in the control room will send me through those questions. So a little bit about me before we start. My name is Matthew Harper. As I said, I started my company, Resilient Results, about a year ago now, with the aim of providing emergency management, crisis management, exercising, planning, expertise to industry, government. I'm based in Canberra, but I work with people both around the country and into Europe to just try to provide users with the plans and the exercises they're really after. On the screen now, if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn and check the rest of my bio out, that's the QR code on the bottom, or my website's the QR code on the top. So what are we going to talk about today? What I've promised to talk about is the new MOS and how it relates to emergency management. What we've done with the new Airport Practice Notes 1 and 2, a bit about what this really means to working with the emergency management folks, and let's look with this new regime how exercising will actually fit in and what you really need to do for most airports. So I guess if you're super familiar with the new MOS, please forgive this, but for those who aren't, it's moved to a performance-based emergency management system. So there's two fundamental changes in the whole MOS. It's the differences in who needs to have a fully standalone airdrome emergency management committee and who actually needs to have an airdrome emergency management plan. So the two clauses are subsection 2 applies if you have those scheduled international air transport operations. There's two fundamental changes in and 35, sorry, I'm just getting some bad feedback here of my own voice, so, or 350,000 or more air transport passenger movements. So if you are there, you need a standalone committee. If not, you have to fit into the community emergency management plan. The plan, paragraph 24.02, the aerodrome emergency plan, says that if you have international air travel, 50,000 or more air transport passenger movements, or 100,000 or more aircraft movements, then you must have an aerodrome emergency plan for the airport. If you don't, you have to be clearly identified, and that can have some tricks. So in the APN rewrite, we've written a process so that you can actually be clearly identified and be compliant. 1,000 or more 24.02. 100,000 or more aircraft movements. So then you must plan requirements for the airport. If you don't, you have to be clearly identified. Sorry, I'm just going to have to. That can have some tricks. So in the APN rewrite, sorry about that. Just a little bit of feedback there. So our plan requirements for airport emergency plans are fairly strong. It's performance-based, so they've given some really broad objectives to what the plan has to have, and then where what you have to do. So you've got to really read the MOS in a little bit of an open-minded way, and that I really think CASA has done a really good job here to try to make it work. I've just had a message externally. I'm just going to excuse everyone. Dean, can you check feedback to everything? Sorry, folks. Just send a message off to our tech. He's in Sydney, I'm in Canberra. So the performance then goes on to what you have to do for testing. The two sections really are, if you fit into that higher level of airport, you need to either have a modular testing regime to test modules within a 3-year process, and then go to a full airport exercise, or a full airport exercise every 2 years. So there is no one rule fits all here. I personally think modular tests will give you a better outcome and will be easier, but some airports and some emergency management communities are probably going to prefer the once every 2-year response. If you're not in that group, you are required to make sure that your emergency responders know how to get onto the airport, know where things are, and can actually access everything. There's a bit of devil in the detail here, and that is the concept of airdrome assembly areas. And there's a little bit of discussion in airport communities and emergency management of what an aerodrome assembly area actually is. We think it really means the marshalling point staging area where the emergency services will come together before entering the airport, or once they get into the airport where they go to. We don't think it actually means where people will evacuate from terminal buildings, because that's a different issue. So there's a couple of words that aren't defined in the MOS and aren't defined in the regulation, and defined in multiple different standards of different things. One of the most significant things about the MOS is what's gone, and that is the requirement to do the natural hazards planning. So for a long time, there's been a requirement written in there that you have to cover storms and floods and tempests, and very much the original concept of emergency management of being all hazards, that they really asked that all of your normal community emergency management requirements were covered in your emergency plan. That's completely gone. It's also taken out any references to the terminal or any other facility emergency management plans. And that's really interesting, and I know a lot of people have some very passionate feelings on that. What it has meant is that the MOS now talks about the airfield and where aircraft move. It doesn't talk about all those other places that now exist on most airports. It's been interesting as I've wandered around the country and spoken to different sized airports and people and contractors and consultants and fire brigades and police. Everyone is usually pretty understanding of where the airfield part is. And I'm talking to that sort of as someone, people who don't normally go to an airport every day, so they don't operate on an airport. People understand what the terminal is, but when you get other buildings that are on airport land, under the old structure, how they actually related to the MOS and the requirement for an AEP wasn't completely clear. So this has cleaned a lot of that up. So what does it mean to emergency plans? So it's allowed us a little bit of an opportunity to have a bit of a think and to say, where are plans going in the future? So there's a couple of, I guess, positions we've taken, both pre the consultation to get us thinking, and then during the consultation as people talked about a lot of stuff, and we started fleshing out some ideas. And so at places like the AAA conference, I ran a lot of these ideas past people and got a few more. So I'm just going to pose to you a couple of things. Some of them are a bit controversial. So if you think they're controversial and you want to object, send in a question and we'll get back to it. So it's all about opportunity, and it's embracing emergency management outside airports. So fundamentally, our premise really is clearly now that we're in Australia and we're not anywhere else. If you look at the IATA best practice guidelines, they make perfect sense for an airport in America or in Europe, where the airport itself owns everything, where they have their own hospital, They have their own police force that are separate to the state police, their own fire brigades. They probably own an ambulance. They'll have the full medical centre. They'll have the morgue. They are themselves their own community. Australia, we're not like that. We are part of a bigger emergency management community, and we need to be part of it. The MOS pretty clearly says, go be a part of the emergency management community. Of course, there are exemptions, and I know some of the people that are listening come from providers of private airports. Where that community doesn't exist, then there's a requirement there that you probably have to cover that. So you'll be covering your own fire services. You'll probably be covering your own medevac services. But even then, you'll work those into the broader state capabilities. So it's really important that our plans no longer reflect this 1980s, 90s view of American airports. This is actually about Australia and a system that works really well. The other part is airports don't dictate emergency management operations. Across Australia, state agencies have the legal operational lead and will use their processes, training and resources. It's not the role of airports to dictate any type of emergency management response, particularly once the police, the fire brigade, the health authorities, someone who has a legislative responsibility to respond to someone in trouble is there, they will take charge. And we all know that. But if you go to the stock standard IATA definitions, there's a real indication that the airport becomes this sort of super manager of emergencies. So we've taken, if we embrace this, this makes our lives a little bit easier. This point came out with a couple of people we discussed, and it's really that airports are airports. They don't need to be everything to everyone. So across the country, if you read all of the legislation, all the emergency management roles are identified in legislation and in plan and in policy and in guidelines. There's not a lot of mention in airports. In many ways, airports are really looked at as another community entity. It's another Westfield, it's another big car park, it's another railway station. People don't particularly put a lot of effort into holding out airports on their own. So merging into that system and being airports in the system is probably going to be a lot easier. The other side of it is we know that we have lots of issues still in Australia. We've got all this policy, everything works very well, but we still have the occasional issues where different parts of the emergency management spectrum don't necessarily fully understand their role and don't necessarily get on. It's not the airport's role to solve those issues. You're working in a system where the state takes that responsibility. It's not the role of an airport emergency management committee to solve really complex jurisdictional boundary issues, who's in charge. That's up to the police agencies and the fire agencies, and they should be nominating that when the whole event is going through the planning process. I know there's a couple of airports in really awkward positions that have been placed in the middle of trying to sort out boundary issues between policing agencies and fire agencies. Let's step back. Let's let them have that fight. They are required under their state legislation to provide service and to provide assistance. If they're going to take the lead, they have to be part of the plan. So embrace it. You know, it's real. And I think airports really are more complex than ever. They're certainly more complex than a lot of the international suggestions, the IATA, even the ICAO stuff. Airports are a lot more complex than that. It's not just about running aircraft anymore. You've got multiple leases on the site. You've got legal conflicts between different structures. You've got some really interesting environmental concerns. You've got shopping centres on airport lands, car parks, petrol stations, all the types of things for a small town. And quite often you're fitting over some really complex environments. If you embrace the emergency management world, that's what they deal with every day. So let's embrace it and let's not try to have plans for absolutely everything. Another one that that gets people really worked up is this concept that airlines will be there. And in an emergency, an airline could really be a useful source of information, data, resources, help. At the same time, they could all be in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Shanghai, anywhere else in the world, particularly for regional airports. And in some of the conversations I've had where you've got a single ground operating agent who takes off a T-shirt for one airline, puts on a T-shirt for another airline, they are the resource, and they are not necessarily going to be there and have all the data and information that something like an IATA guideline will have. So the reality is, let's embrace that. Let's not write them into our plans and let a pretend situation dictate where we are. Real issue when we're doing this, who is an airport plan written for? And we've been through an era, certainly when I was being a planning officer in the state government, and then when I was Director of Planning for Emergency Management Australia, we went through this phase where we suddenly took all of the emergency plans offline. We hid them somewhere. We stripped them of all useful information because it was a security issue. Particularly as a regional airport, you're dealing with regional emergency management people, so you have to look at what you're actually putting out there so they can get access to it. So really, is your plan written for CASA? Well, yes, because you won't follow the rules. It's pretty obvious. Is it there to guide the response in emergency? Yes, that's its primary purpose. And is it for your response leaders? So it needs to be something that can be online. It can be available at the gate. It should be in a form and a readability aspect that lots of people can use it, and you can get folks there. So if you're in an area where you've got retained firefighters, maybe voluntary ambulance, maybe volunteer rescue association, the police might be your only full-time emergency management agency, and then you may only get a fairly junior officer there. So your plan has to be available to lots and lots of people, and it has to cope with those people not being around in number 2 and number 3 and down to the junior deputy captain turning up and understanding your plan. The other part is the plan written for today. Was it tomorrow, or was it like 10 years ago? So does the plan reflect what your real situation is on your airport now and where your master plan is perhaps sending you in the next 5 years? Does it reflect the emergency management community? And I'm thinking of a lot of parts in country, Australia, where boundaries have changed and you no longer have a superintendent of police. You might have an inspector or even a sergeant. You no longer have a local fire brigade permanent officer. You might have a retained or someone who's covering a huge area. So you really have to reflect that community. Is your plan reflecting your technology? Certainly a lot of old plans out there talk about people having multiple radio channels that don't exist. If you use text, if you use a commercialized system, let's make sure that's in there. And is it going to meet the needs of your airport? Is the plan actually doing what you need to do? So in preparing the new versions of the APN, we looked at these big questions and put them to people and really started coming up with some really good stuff. So I'd like to introduce you firstly to what we've written and get some ideas or see what you think. So this is the old APN 1 and 2 structure was a small airport and then other airports. APN 1 has stayed with small airports, and it's in 2 sections, a preamble and then a template plan. So the idea is if you're doing this, you can just grab the template plan and fill in the boxes, have your meeting with the local emergency management committee and work together. It says really, we've put a couple of bases for what our real role is in emergency management as airports. And actually saying, hey, we're embracing emergency management in the community. If there's a community structure, we're just going to be part of it. We're not going to try to have a standalone. So our aim is to do that. A lot of it pushes you back to local government or to the local police, however you're arranged in your local community to work in with your emergency management committee. A lot of small, very small airports are of course owned by council, so just integrating back into the council arrangements for dealing with the emergency management committee is probably the best way you're going to get some traction. Where they're getting a bit bigger and you're sort of sitting as a self-managing commercial unit, you're probably having to go to the emergency management committee and negotiate how you're going to move into the local emergency management or disaster management committee. But whichever way you go, you're going to go there as a really key part of the community. It does fall out a little bit for those privately owned aerodromes for commercial activity, and really APN1 will give you a good guideline, but it won't cover all of those workplace health and safety issues that a private aerodrome might have to deal with. Now, the template plan for APN1, it's 10 pages long, and I reckon that's a fairly good size sticking at the back of a local emergency management plan. So it sits there as an annex. It's been written to just sit there, to not replicate 50 or 60 pages of a local plan and all the other stuff. It's really about, here is our annex. 10 pages long, and there's the current table of contents from the plan. So just having a quick look at it, I haven't gone into this super detail at the moment, but it just has a quick aim, and it's got all the concepts of a normal emergency management plan, a brief description of the aerodrome as a table, and I'll show you an example of a table that I've used in APN2 in a minute. A quick run through of emergency response, of how you notify of an emergency, then recovery, maintenance, capability maintenance, and then the annexes that are required. One of the interesting things that we went through, and then I spoke to a number of really small airports, was the concept that the vast majority of small airports don't have someone there 24 hours a day. You might have a private business who is actually operating somewhere on the airport, and they might sort of take some airport management roles. You might have an airport manager who drives out to meet scheduled aircraft, but on any one day, aircraft could land, and they have to nominate that they've landed and go through all of the payment issues. So what happens if you have a crash and there's no one there? We discussed this with a lot of people of how do you make sure people are dialing AAA. So this plan actually fully acknowledges that there are times that your airport doesn't have the capability to have a manager on site, and it gives you a bit of a guideline for how you just find a location and turn it into your emergency management board. It has dial AAA, go to this location, go to this gate, to make your whole airport community actually a part of the response rather than waiting for someone to take charge. That's going to be really essential for those emergency crash on airports. The other part is that really blatant statement that I picked up from a couple of people's plans, that if a pilot declares a local standby, how you actually transfer that to the emergency management community or a full emergency. And when I did the first version of this, I took it to a meeting of regional emergency management people, and I put them out on the table, and I said, look, let's read it, let's talk about it. So they all read it quickly, and one of them picked up a pen and started scribbling madly over the word full emergency. He said, this annoys me. I see this in the plan, and I have to explain to them that it's an emergency, it's not a full emergency. And we talked through that defined term in the airport world or the airline world of the full emergency and the local standby and PAN calls and everything. And he realised that fundamentally he'd been wrong. He'd been placing the local or the state definition of emergency into the airport definition of emergency, into the international airline definition of emergency, which don't necessarily line up. And you go, how am I supposed to know? And I thought, oh, that's an interesting point. So we put those definitions back in there to try to educate folks a bit more. So there's points through the template where if you're going to call, we're recommending if you're going to have a local standby, you'll actually just call people to the airport as a full response. So when you're going to have a look, it's not to be slavishly followed. It's a good idea. Let's pop over to APN2, which is everything other than those very small airports that only need, a very light touch emergency plan. So APN2 had to cover that range of airports from the big internationals, Sydney, Brisbane, all the way down to, in my mindset, Brisbane's Hobart, that middle ground of airports that have the capability to take very large aircraft, who have regular passenger transport, who have some very complex requirements. So APN2 has to do a lot. One of the decisions we made is we were no longer going to make it a catch-all for all types of emergency management and response. Emergency Management Australia, through the the portal, provides lots and lots of emergency planning, management, exercise management guidance. There's no point repeating that in this document. You're better off to go and get that just straight from the most current versions. So there's nice lists of links where people can go and get more information. It completely conforms to the MOS naturally. We're very silent on emergency planning in terminals and facilities in line with the MOS. We'll come back to that in a minute. And it conforms to Australia's practices and our realistic conditions. So our first part is in the preamble. So I've written it the same way. There's a preamble and then there's a template. Is a very straight up front statement about, are we different? And I've taken this to a couple of the airlines and said, this is why maybe we're having a little bit of a clash between some airports, because we don't necessarily understand both sides of the argument, who's doing what. So we've put up front that really we are different. We're not America. This is how we will work in emergency planning. The MOS then provides that requirement for you to have a committee, and I've spoken an awful lot to people who have full-time a standalone emergency management committee, who they have on the committee and how they deal with it. And certainly the IATA and ICAO definitions require airport operators, aircraft operators, tenants, and all sorts of people. But really defining how your committee works is going to be really, really important. A lot of the people in that typical committee don't exist at a lot of airports. So if you're a small regional airport and you've decided you're not going to have a standalone committee for excellent reasons, you probably have to have a quick look through that list and go, is there anyone who's really on my airport who deals with airport emergency management who isn't on the local committee? The one issue might be tenants, and you might have to work out something for tenants, particularly if they are going to actively assist in an emergency context. But I've got to say, I'm struggling for a good example of, say, how you might use contract refuelers to provide some type of assistance outside something like a contract service provider to a small airport where they provide fire service and fueling and cleaning and the full kit and caboodle. So we've got some guidelines there for how to build your committee. The template again is only 25 pages long. I reckon you can probably get today's airport emergency management plan to about 35 pages if you're careful. In a project that I did lately, our aim was to get the overarching sort of guidance to the plan down to a page, because the chief executives we're going to read the plan once, but really they hired good emergency managers to do all of that stuff and advise them at the right time. They needed the briefing. So we put down, I'm going to actually go through a lot of this and just have a look at exactly what we're suggesting. So really, depending on where you fit in the spectrum and what your complexity of your plans are, you'll take parts of 1 and 2 or just take 2 and just cut off the bits you don't need. So 2 has a lot more detail in it than that very small, probably council-owned single runway strip that has 2 or 3 movements a day. So first part is we've introduced this thing called the concept of operations, and that came out of some problems I had, one with the guys that I went and asked folks, how does it work? And then I sat down with a couple of emergency managers and I said, okay, you've got these really big plans. Just quickly, what happens when an aircraft is coming in and you've got an impending crash? And it's part of the way that I think many of us are trained. We flick to our document and start flicking through it. We go, oh yeah, and then this happened, and you would link it over here. So I did this workshop with a couple of people and we built this concept of operations. And the idea is just to have a one-pager, if possible, that you can hand to the new policeman coming into the town on their first day of coming to meet you, of this is how we're actually going to run an emergency at the airport. And really our emergencies under the AEP pretty much fall under an impending accident and an accident that's happened. So here's just this one page. So the idea of this is that it is rewritten. So the red sections in the APN are recommended that you rewrite them in local language with local conditions, but this is pretty much how you might see this progressing through the day. People have found this really useful. So I've also tried now using this in business continuity plans, where people have a huge problem in really just grasping how the business continuity plan works and how it extends and how it moves from, say, the business continuity officer to the senior management without actually putting in a completely different structure. So have a look at it, give it a whirl. It's a really good exercise to do, particularly with lots of people in the room, to actually say, step by step, plain English, how's this work? The other thing is I've shamefully pinched out of Sydney Airport's plan this structure that they built where they've gone very much to tables. So I've taken this one more step because I reckon you can probably save 10 to 20 pages on an average plan by putting stuff into tables and making sure that it works as a table. So command and control facilities are something that I've seen in a couple of plans go 1 page, 9 pages. You can probably get it down to 2 or 3 by popping them into these nice little tables. So facility, where it is, what its function, who sets it up, who's in charge, who's attending, and what procedures are referenced to do that. So it becomes a really quick reference, which is what your plan's supposed to be. It's not the Bible to go to when something's happening. It's something you train on and plan for, and then you might use it as a quick idea stimulator when it actually happens. So I think it could really help a lot of organisations and airports putting stuff into these really easy tables. We've also changed how welfare centres are listed, and welfare is a bit of an issue, particularly between the different states and territories and how welfare works. So we'll come back to and have a specific discussion on welfare in a minute, and then what the other facilities are. Lots of other facilities in terms of where you can put ATSB if you've got them on site. Are you going to have a media centre? Who's going to lead the media centre? Where's your boss going to go? Where's the corporate price room? So all those things need to be somewhere in the plan. Call out and control is probably one of the things that if you look at a plan and you're not completely across it, you can have some real issues with. So This is where I started, and this is where Sydney Airport implemented this. Now, they implemented a structure similar to this so that they could integrate in with their noggin messaging and incident management system, because it was easier for them to put everything into this big table and then put it into process. So particularly if you're using any form of communications tool or any form of incident management tool, putting something into this type of table works really, really well. So at the top, meanings are really important. Where your activation definitions, and you're getting definitions from somewhere else, so they all go there, and what you mean by standby and alert, call out, and they will all be different depending on your local emergency service. This could really easily work in the lower end plan for a small airport, particularly if you're looking at a bigger community response, because the main emergency management agencies just don't have the capability locally. So what are the big issues before we have some questions that we've really struggled with? Welfare. Yet again, a little bit of a rider here that privately operated and very remote airfields will require some specific welfare planning activities. But in Australia, welfare is pretty much well covered by state arrangements, and the recent bushfire season and floods and storms have really shown that our welfare agencies have come a long way in the past 20 or so years, particularly since the APM was last reviewed. Big parts, police will typically dictate what welfare looks like and what the welfare response is. They will take advice from people, but police will dictate the welfare response. And really, those arrangements from around you must take precedence, otherwise you're taking liability. So integrate into that emergency management system and get other people to do stuff. I had an emergency manager at an airport say to me, he would like everyone off his airport in about an hour, if possible. And really, if you look at most exercises, we exercise over the course of a day and everyone leaves, because that's the way we do welfare in this country. We get people to hospital, we get them off the site to triage locations, we get them into welfare facilities that are well set up and established. So why reinvent the wheel in having them in your airport when you can just work into everybody else? The issue of larger airports, particularly if you're having some international flights and you're introducing Border Force and agriculture and a few other folks, is to really discuss how practical welfare is going to be applied. Are airline representatives going to do registration? In some airports, the definite position of the police is no, it will only ever be done by police or police-approved persons until there is no criminal activity confirmed. So we are in a different world from the original structures. Police are more likely to step forward and take complete control for registration. The police, I think, are also more likely nowadays to lean a lot further forward in an incident and demand full manifests from the airlines. And there is a certain discussion that has to happen, and the AAA is trying to have a really good airline panel at the next emergency management forum to actually say where airlines see their role, because we're fitting into a national system. So those discussions about what is the difference between a clear accident, someone landing wheels up, someone with an engine fire coming down, or a plane that lands and then catches fire and everyone dumps out of it and someone says, I saw this guy. What's the difference? So those discussions have to take place locally and will hugely be dependent on who is around and who can help. We've spent a lot of time talking to aircraft operators and airports about what is the real role of the aircraft operator. Certainly at the last couple of emergency management committee meetings, aircraft operators have been there and they've done the very standard things. They have a go team that will fly in and will be there. And certainly regional airports have said yes, but you've got this one person's there and we've had problems and you've never turned up, and it will still take you 3 hours of flying. We can drive in 6. So when you're doing the plan, we have to be really, really clear. Are aircraft operators reliable, predictable, trained, equipped, and participating in the plan? And with the sheer number of airports in this country, we know we're not having the emergency management teams from the airlines at all of our airports that they service. So we have to make our plans realistic for what our operators are going to do. That other part and the words, and it was actually Greg Pobar over in Perth who said, by the time any of the major airlines flies their go team to me, everyone's at hospital, the investigation is well underway, there's not a lot for them to do for me at the airport. There's a lot for them to do in corporate management and in reputation management, but not a huge amount they're going to help me with at the airport. So if they're not actually present in your location, are they realistically able to help? So our plane arrangements really must be serious, which was something that people have really hammered across to me. Now, a note about risk and exercising. That's the regulation on the side of the screen. The MOS is not prescriptive at all about risk in the emergency management section. It's an interesting concept, if we're taking normal emergency management guidelines for exercises should be realistic for your current operations. You should, if you are running Dash 8 services, you're not doing exercises based on 747 emergency landing. You're testing the real and what really happens. So at a regional airport, you're probably testing a last-minute call and landing and then dealing with an aircraft that was on the ground before other people arrive. So you have to really look at your exercises to make sure is the real there. You have to be testing your plan arrangements. Once you've written it into your plan, and CASA are looking at your plan and they're looking at your testing regime, they're going to want to see that your plan is actually being tested by your exercise regime. And so it has to also be, your exercises have to be useful for responders in the airport. So it's the concept in a small airport of having the walk-through exercise and showing people stuff is really, really useful. So for the smaller exercise, or the smaller aerodromes where section 24.02 does not apply, that annual site visit of your local brigades, your fire brigade, your bushfire brigade, your volunteer rescue association, maybe the local Red Cross if they're going to show up. Now, this is an afternoon and a barbecue and folks getting together and taking a walk through where they're looking at the access points, the assembly areas, the emergency facilities, equipment, how they're going to talk to you in an emergency. If they get there first and they're on their own, what are they going to do, what their expectations are, what your expectations are. But all of that then has to happen within the powers that they can exercise to go and rescue or prevent damage. So that's really good. Those small airport visits are going to be so valuable in this regime. The other point is that annual desktop, or biannual desktop, I think it allows you, I'm sorry, I've got one word, I'm not sure it's completely right, but if you're having a desktop in the emergency management committee and you're running a 1 hour discussion exercise about if we have this, how we are working, regular little desktops to run through little quick scenarios are probably in a regional setting so much more useful and so much more likely to actually talk to the people who will be there on the day. So don't think big when little will really work well. The larger airports, this concept now that you have this 3-year modular program is absolutely fantastic. It's very much build yourself a matrix, slowly build up all the elements so that you do test a response to the assembly area. Getting someone to the gate in the middle of the night and actually getting it open and then doing an escort across the field to the locations. Suddenly opening up your storage area and getting it ready. Finding the bottles of water. All of those little tiny modules which you could almost run every week, every month, will be absolutely fantastic. They don't have to be big modules, but they should all add up and join together to come to the big exercise. You also have to tell us those harder aspects which are almost always the difficult ones to do. They're always, hard and difficult, pretty obvious. The harder aspects are sometimes the practical ones that are a bit awkward. What happens when you suddenly get a call to open a gate at the wrong time? What happens when an aircraft is crossing the wrong runway and catches fire? Those little bits, and just break them all down into the modules to get to the big ones. And then same thing, test the wheels. Just make your major exercise a wheels up landing where people are shaken up and hurt. We don't have to have half the airport closed off. We don't have to have people physically, injured in doing the exercise, but we don't have to have half the airport notionally dead, the aircraft notionally dead. It can be the thing that really, really happens a lot. No one in these exercises learns a lot from people spraying around a lot of water and getting people really sick and lying in the sun for hours. All of that stuff can be done as a module in really nice controlled environments. And the fire brigades and the ARC and everyone will all do those drills separately to your emergency management program. And that's probably really important. I'm going to throw it open to questions, and how the questions are actually going to work is as people do their questions, Dean in the control room, who I'm looking at now, he will transfer the questions over into a text box for me because we're having some issues today with his dulcet tones coming to my ears without sort of causing horrible feedback. So the one question I can see up there already is when are the APMs going to be ready? At the moment, the draft documents have gone off to a proofreader. We're looking at a couple of little language issues, and of course words have meanings, and we're going through where every one of those rotten commas is to make sure the comma is in the right spot. So we've got all of those issues going through at the moment. That's probably taking a little bit longer than we really wanted, but we will push it out as soon as we can. Sorry, I'll just read this one. It's looking at the grid, just talk a bit more about the grid. So let's put back, sorry. I think this is the grid that someone's asking about. When Sydney Airport developed this, it was about making sure that everyone knew who got the various messages at the right times. Their automated messaging system was sending messages to their senior management, and they were trying to work out exactly where those messages should go and to who, and to then educate their management where they went. So they started with a small version of this. What we've done is we've increased it to include things like which staging area people will go to, who the control agency is, the lead agency. The other issue that we've had is a lot of discussion around the words like control agency, staging area, lead agency. Are you having an ICS format? What are you training people to? With the APM, we've tried to stay right out of all of those issues. I had a comment that everyone uses the ICS system, and that's true. Everyone, or AIMS, almost every agency in Australia uses an ICS. All fire services use, and they use a version of AIMS. But if you look at all of the emergency management agencies around the country who are currently pushing something out, I read a paper the other day that says there's 42 versions of an ICS in active use in Australia at the moment. Some of them change by the tiniest words. So, do you have an intelligence section? Does the situation officer stand on their own and report to the incident controller? Do you have commanders? All of those things are so state dependent, and we are not quite to the stage that even all five are completely aligned. We're certainly not to the point that the fire brigades and the police and the ambulance services are completely aligned across, particularly in border regions. There's always going to be that issue. One other comment is you'll notice there the staging area for a water crash. The MOS is very clear that if you have an airport that's contiguous to water and there's a chance the aircraft is going to land in the water, the airport operator has to look at the water protocols and make sure that they're there. It's going to be really interesting when you don't actually necessarily have a water agency sitting on a airport emergency committee who actually can show you, maybe hundreds of pages of protocol that you aren't qualified to look at. So there'll be little bits like that where you probably better off as we move towards the new MOS being implemented, getting some of that data and at least getting people to submit their SOPs and their principles or their policies to you and PDFing them and sticking them there so that you can just discuss them at a time when it's appropriate. Just check, are there any other specific questions at the moment? Dean's looking at me very meaningfully and shaking his head that we don't have any more questions. As soon as the APN comes out in its next version of draft, we'll certainly, the AAA will be out to talk to you. It will certainly be available on the members website. So as a AAA member, you can go to the resources page, you can click on the pretty front cover, and it will give you the PDF version and a downloadable Word version so that you can just start working on it. Happy to take calls after this if you just want to have a private word about anything. I'll quickly whip back to my phone numbers and everything. Sorry about that. But yeah, please feel free to send me a message or send me an email and we can talk about any aspects and anything that I've discovered. Finally, a shout out. There's a number of you out there who have been actively involved in the review so far and who have given me some really great feedback. That's been absolutely great. Really couldn't have done this much without you. For everyone who came up to me at the Airports Association, sat at the booth and talked, really appreciate your help. And if we have to go and redraft this, that's okay. But having really active engagement from the airport community has been absolutely essential. A last minute question just come in. Am I available to assist organisations? Naturally, I'm available, and I promise I won't sort of look as squinty and horrible in that photo when I'm actually looking at you face to face. But I guess my way of operating is let's have a talk. Let's work out what you need, and let's get you going. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to say have a great day. We will talk along the way, and I'll see you at various AAA meetings around the country. So thank you for tuning in, and this will be available, I understand, on the AAA website in a short amount of time if you wish to watch back and listen to it at 1.5 speed, which is really quite good. Thank you very much.